Welcome to Conversations with the Coach by Center for Peace, the podcast where we have candid conversations about addressing and correcting the abuse of women by men. I'm your host, Coach Joy, and each week we'll dive deep into the stories, the strategies, and the solutions that help restore the dignity and lives of those affected by abuse. At Center for Peace, we believe in the power of education, understanding, and actionable change. We'll be talking with survivors, experts, advocates, and those who have committed to making amends, providing a platform for voices that need to be heard and stories that need to be shared. Together, we aim to foster a supportive community where we not only discuss the impacts of abuse, but also focus on the steps necessary to heal, empower, and restore dignity. Join us as we explore the complexities of abuse, challenge the societal norms that perpetuate it, and highlight the incredible resilience and strength of survivors. This is more than just conversation. It's about inspiring change and creating a safer, more respectful world for everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Back with another episode of Conversations with the Coach, where tonight I'm going to break down this statement that I hear all the time on a lot of social media platforms, a lot of influencers. Can a narcissist change? Well, I think we're asking the wrong question here. And I also think we might be mixing up some of the different categories that we're actually looking at. You know, you can go in the DSM and look at what does it take to actually be diagnosed with what they are still and currently calling a narcissistic personality disorder. And that's a completely different condition and population than what we really are talking about when we ask the question on a social media platform, on a podcast, on a blog. Can a narcissist change? Two completely different sets of guidelines. Though there may be some crossover behaviors, it really is a different, we're looking at apples and oranges. And so then the question then becomes, really, can people change? And absolutely, people can change. And changing behavior is just a series of decisions and a series of steps and patterns that one implements. But nobody changes unless they have an interest or a desire to do so. So I think we're asking the wrong question here. Why should somebody who exercises what people call narcissistic behavior, why should they change? As long as they're getting what they want, and as long as this is a behavior that seems to be fairly permissible in society. I mean, we give them a lot of notoriety. We're talking about these behaviors all of the time. And so, they're getting a lot of attention from it. They're able to power over other people and control other people. They're able to control finances. There's a lot of sexual coercion. There's just, some really cruel and inhumane treatment of other people. And there's usually a target, right? This is not something that's most narcissists do not, or people who we are calling narcissists who are fitting into this, pop psych or this folk psych trend, are usually have a target of somebody that they hurt and injured. And it's usually their intimate partner. And so really what we're looking at is targeted partner abuse. That's the behavior that we're putting under this umbrella of narcissism. And as long as that individual is getting the notoriety that he wants, which he's able to do so because he's able to secure, flying monkeys that he can, that support his behavior and his agenda and his story. He's either got a community from his SA groups, if he's in a sexual or addiction recovery, and I'm air quoting all of that. So he's got a community of people who are like-minded, who support the behaviors and support the beliefs. We've got a lot of notoriety of people talking about it, of people writing blogs about it. And you can go all over Dr. Google and find a lot of information. People with, from the PhD level to the life coach level, just, hanging up an online shingle and, and working from their Zoom. And honestly, this is not an easy condition to diagnose, to label. So really, what we're really looking at is we're looking at types or patterns of behavior in a certain set of population of people, and the types of behaviors are executed on a spectrum. Not everybody is doing exactly the same thing. So there's a spectrum of behavior, and you have some people who are, almost at the dangerous level, and then you'll have others who, who are just callous, cold-hearted, inconsiderate. Don't seem to have any pro-social regard for other people, particularly the one that they're targeting. And so a lot of times what's happening is we're lumping, when we're talking about this online and talking about it on our different platforms, we're lumping a lot of things into a lot of absolutes. We make a lot of statements about what they won't do or what they do, what they, the reasons why. It's very, very prescriptive. And I think there's a lot of danger in all of these prescriptive ways that we talk about it. We talk about, childhood harm. We talk about attachment. We've got a myriad of theories that we keep lumping into this population of people. And I know this is not gender specific to men, but this is the population I work in, and so this is what I'm speaking to. I know that there are parents, and potentially women who may engage in some of these behaviors. And one big caution is, if we are in a helping profession and we're not treating that other person, we need to be very, very careful the labels that we use. If we're treating a client, we're working with an individual, then we have more of an opportunity to speak into that because we know the story. But even so, unless we're actually running diagnostics, we should be really, really careful about the labels that we're using and how we're attaching labels and how we're assigning behavioral identifiers. And especially when we're assigning behavioral identifiers with the absolutes. He'll never do this. He always does that. Even though we see such strong commonalities within this population of behavioral issues, yet none of these behaviors are pro-social. They're very inhumane. And speaking to women who've been injured by men, I've been working in that population, in that field for decades, and I know the hurt. I know it at a personal level. I know it at a professional level. And I have enough of my own grounded theory and my own grounded research to look at and see the wreckage that is created by people who by men who hurt women. And for a long time, there has been beliefs, ideologies, scripts within our social fabric where men give themselves permission to do these kinds of things. And I think that's really the bigger problem that we need to look at. And within that same problem set, we also need to look at why these men continue to be able to get away with it while also blaming their victim for the way that she responds to his abuse. That's the real issue that we should be working as a collective to resolve. We're never going to resolve a problem just spouting off about it from our platforms. We're only going to resolve problems when we bring it down into our grassroots level within our own sphere of influence and really try to help people at the people level. There's never going to be a top-down way of really dealing with this issue. What's been in academia for so long is wrong information. There is no agreed to definition of all of this. There's no agreed to treatment for this. There's no agreed to anything. Even in the addiction community, there's no agreement on things being actually an addiction. And so from the top-down level, across many theories, across many platforms, we've got misinformation. We're taught misinformation academically. We dispel misinformation in our spheres, And Dr. Google doesn't help any of that, any of those search engines with all of those things out there. People pick up information, regurgitate it out on their platforms, and so we're inundated with things that are not really accurate. And then we act on those and believe that those things are factual when really they're not. And when we actually stop and really look at research that's coming out of viable and trusting labs about the brain and about behavior and about people and how we operate as human beings, we can stop and see things from a completely different lens. But until we're really actually willing to look at that and to stop and to throw out some of these theories that have really, they're not theories, they're just old stories. We're still going to be stuck labeling things wrongly and treating things and diagnosing things wrongly. And again, I'm going to go back to that point that I made a few minutes ago. If we are diagnosing, if we are assessing, but we are not seeing that individual, that there's ethics errors in all of that, and we need to be careful. We should never listen to the story of a client without that client being present. If we're not working with both people, we're not seeing the whole story either. If you can't bring both parties into safely, and I don't recommend couples work at all, especially while we're trying to unpack what really happened. If we can't bring both parties into it with a safe mediator, we're not going to be able to get to the root of the truth. And somebody who will lie and cheat on and cause such a wreckage, that person really does not deserve the benefit of the doubt in a coaching setting or in a clinical setting. And so to have somebody who's been serial cheating or looking at porn for decades, lying, hiding money, sneaking around, all of that kind of thing, to believe that story without looking at the impact of that story, the one that he hurt and wounded, we're also doing both of those people a great disservice. And we are not helping as helping professionals. So this has been my soapbox for a long time. Because having been in this field, as I said, for decades, working with both the victims and the abusers, I've seen the carnage. And I've seen the damage that comes from the clinical side of it as well. I've seen the damage that comes from the clerical side, from pastors and ecclesiastical leaders who do not, first of all, they're not trained to deal with this. They're not trained to see it. They do not work in the field. And so they miscounsel, they misdirect. Therapists, life coaches that are not trained. This is not something that you can do with a life coaching degree. It really is tricky. It's one thing to work with women and to sit with women and walk alongside them without clinical degrees. But if you're going to work within this population with men without clinical degrees, it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult to be able to work with them, to parse out behavior, to listen to all the stories that we create in our mind, because we're all storytellers in our head. It's all based on our experience, and it makes sense. It makes sense to us. Those are our thoughts and those are our feelings based off of our experience. So it makes sense that we're going to tell those stories. But stories are very myopic, and they are often told very taintedly and in a way to get ourselves out of a situation that we put ourselves in. So if you've got a man who's been looking at porn for decades, hiding that and keeping it from his wife, and his wife is upset and now wanting him to be responsible, and then all of a sudden now he's trying to talk like his wife is at fault for various and sundry reasons that are also not accurate and do not tell the whole story. This is messy people stuff, and we need to be careful how we treat it. So, what makes for good change in behavior, and what makes for good change in behavior is someone's willingness to do it. If somebody isn't actually willing to look at what they are doing and the impact of what they are doing, what's the benefit of changing? if they don't see anything wrong with it. So somebody who's abusing and who's targeting a partner, they do that from a place of power and want to be able to maintain that power for the most part, or they'd stop what they're doing and move on. If there's not a payout, right? If they're not gaining anything from it, what's the benefit of continuing on? So there's always a payout for that individual exercising power and control over another individual, where they wouldn't engage in the behavior. So in order for them to change, there's got to be a different payout. There's got to be something that they're willing to work towards in order to give up one thing for another outcome. So without somebody's agent will and willingness to actually do the hard work, to really sit down with their thinking, to really develop what we call in therapy the theory of mind, and that is the ability to sit with both stories. There's always two stories because there's two people involved in this kind of an abuse. There's the abuser and there's the victim, and these two people are in a social exchange with one another. And there's always ongoing things that are happening, and those stories are twisted and tied together tightly with lots of details and lots of thoughts and feelings and emotions. And sometimes there's children involved in it. And then sometimes when they've sought help, there's maybe clergy or family involved in it. And the stories are very, very convoluted, and they take a long time to unpack. So if somebody's been telling themselves a story, especially an abusive man who wants the story to be often they want the story to be the most minimum, so that there's not a lot of responsibility attached to the outcome, they're not going to tell the whole story. They're not going to tell the extent of what they've done. And they're going to try to mutualize it and get their partner involved in it, because we have a social theory that takes two to tango, right? And as long as we can mutualize that, and as long as a social community we support, that takes two people to cause a problem, that we can't ever start with who started it, because there's always a someone who starts it. And until we're willing to go back to that question that we had on the playground, or that your parents asked you when they're breaking up a tussle between you and another sibling, something always initiates. A has to be in place before B can respond. That's social exchange, and that's human behavior. There's a lot to look at, to unpack what we're really dealing with. And yes, it's at an epidemic level. And yes, as I said before, there's a spectrum of behavior from injury that's more mild to injury that's very, very dangerous. And it is something that we should be talking about. But I think we need to be very careful how we talk about it, how we're discussing it, the assignments of labels and the assignments of diagnoses, and walk through this population, those of us who are people helpers, carefully. One of the things that all of us should be very mindful of is doing no harm. And there's already been enough harm in the lives of the victims. And so we need to be very, very careful. And we also need to respect the agency of both people involved. When we engage in a helping relationship with somebody, we don't come in as an authority. We come in as a support system. We come in to help and to walk alongside. And we need to be very careful how we teach and how we instruct, so that we're sharing a message of hope and potential, and then letting those two individuals agentically choose. That restores dignity. That restores the trust and respect that's been taken from the victim. And the perpetrator, the abuser, has a right to his agency as well. He just doesn't have a right to continue to cause harm in somebody else's life. And harm does need to be stopped. And sometimes that does mean that a victim, a wife, a partner will choose to separate or choose to leave. And she has every right to do so if harm cannot be stopped, if abuse continues. Abuse is not just physical, and we also need to move past that narrative, that psychological, emotional, verbal abuse can often be much worse on a victim. You can't take words back. Bruises heal. You cannot heal the bruises of emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse by just giving them time for the physical injury to go away. They can heal over time as people learn to work through um, the lingering wounds of it, and people can move through that. But words stay. Words stay. Experiences stay. They'll be always a part of our life, and we'll take them with us. But they don't heal in the same way, and they take a lot more concentrated care to be able to process through. So my message today is for all of us in this field to be careful as we walk through this population. Be careful with the language that we use. Be careful with labels. Be careful with our absolutes. Nothing is an absolute. We need to be careful with the words that we say about people. We're as unique as each individual is unique. Each situation, each marriage, each coupleship is unique, and the way that behaviors are deployed can be very unique, even though there's a lot of similarities. So do your research, people. Be careful. We're working with human beings who deserve to be respected and deserve to be treated carefully as we navigate something that's very, very serious in our society right now. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.